The spectacle of a Chinese military parade is always a calculated display of strength, unity, and symbolism. But when Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso, stood to salute Xi Jinping's troops and their thunderous march. Across Beijing's vast ceremonial square, the world felt the tremor of something far more profound than military might. The image of a revolutionary African leader paying respect to the most orchestrated projection of Chinese power reverberated across continents, igniting debates in the halls of diplomacy, in military think tanks, and among ordinary citizens who sensed that a moment of realignment had just unfolded before their eyes. It was not simply a salute. It was a gesture layered with history, ambition, and the quiet assertion of a future that may no longer be dictated solely by the old powers of the West. Traore, who rose to prominence as the embodiment of defiance against neo-colonial domination, represents more than just Burkina Faso's youthful energy. He stands as a symbol of Africa's yearning for sovereignty, dignity, and self-determination after centuries of exploitation. When he stepped into Beijing's ceremonial stage and acknowledged Xi Jinping's parade, he was not merely engaging in diplomatic courtesy. He was recognizing a shared struggle, a parallel narrative between China's historical journey from subjugation to resurgence and Africa's ongoing fight to escape the grip of external control. For China, the moment confirmed its expanding role as Africa's partner of choice. For Africa, it suggested a pivot away from dependency toward alliances that appear to offer respect and reciprocity. The parade itself was designed to dazzle. Rows of Chinese soldiers marched in perfect unison, each step echoing discipline and loyalty to the party. Fighter jets carved patterns into the sky, armored columns rolled across the square, and intercontinental ballistic missiles glistened under the morning sun, their presence both reassurance and deterrence. Xi Jinping's words thundered with confidence, declaring that the era of humiliation was over and that China would defend its sovereignty with unshakable resolve. The speech invoked history, pride, and ambition, yet all eyes repeatedly shifted to Traore, whose youthful face and upright stance seemed to merge two continents into one shared moment of symbolism. For many Africans watching the broadcast, Traore's salute was electrifying. It was as though their own struggles were represented at the heart of a global spectacle. They saw a young leader not bowing, not submitting, but standing shoulder to shoulder with one of the most powerful men on earth, acknowledging the discipline of another nation's forces while signaling Africa's readiness to chart its own path. To the youth of Burkina Faso and beyond, it was an affirmation that Africa's leaders could step confidently onto the world stage, not as clients or dependents, but as equals prepared to shape the narrative of the 21st century. In Western capitals, however, the gesture sent ripples of unease. Analysts debated whether this was a symbolic alliance forming in plain sight, one that might accelerate Africa's departure from the Western orbit of influence. Was Traoré signaling a military partnership? Was he endorsing China's model of development and governance? Or was the salute a carefully calculated message to Washington, Paris, and Brussels that Africa now had other options and would no longer be bound by the dictates of old alliances? The interpretations varied, but the unease was palpable. To many in the West, the image represented not just a salute, but a defiance, a silent yet powerful declaration that Africa's loyalties could no longer be assumed. The historical undercurrents of this moment are crucial to understand. China itself endured what it calls the century of humiliation, a period of colonial subjugation and foreign domination that resonates deeply with African histories of colonization. Xi Jinping's speeches often frame China's rise as the end of that humiliation and the dawn of rejuvenation. For Traore, who has consistently invoked Burkina Faso's right to self-determination and its rejection of neo-colonial interference, The symbolism was unavoidable. He saw in China's story a mirror of Africa's aspirations, and his salute was not just to the soldiers of China, but to the shared dream of liberation from imposed dependency. Yet the reaction that shook the world did not come from the gesture alone, but from Traore's words afterward. Standing before the cameras, with Xi Jinping at his side, Traore spoke in a tone that carried both respect and quiet defiance. He praised the discipline and strength of China's armed forces, acknowledging the history that had shaped them, but then pivoted to Africa's own struggle. He declared that Africa would no longer allow itself to be weakened by division or manipulated by external powers. He said Africa was learning from those who had reclaimed their sovereignty and dignity, and he insisted that Burkina Faso's fight was part of a broader awakening sweeping across the continent. The resonance of his words was immediate. In Africa's streets, in universities, in rural villages, his message spread like fire. For the youth, it was validation of their frustrations with poverty, exploitation, and foreign interference. For leaders across the continent, it was a reminder that the balance of global alliances was shifting. And for the West, it was a wake-up call that the rhetoric of partnership without genuine respect would no longer suffice. The reaction shook the world not because it was unexpected, but because it crystallized what many had feared or hoped: that Africa was no longer silent, no longer passive, but ready to assert itself with allies of its choosing. The geopolitical implications are vast. By saluting Xi Jinping's military parade, Traore positioned himself not only as a leader within Africa, but as a participant in the global contest between great powers. China has long sought to deepen its ties with Africa through infrastructure, trade, and investment. But with Traore's gesture, those ties acquired a new layer of symbolism, a military and ideological solidarity that cannot be dismissed as mere economics. The salute suggested alignment, not subordination, a partnership built on mutual recognition of struggle. Whether or not this alignment becomes formalized into military cooperation remains to be seen, but the perception itself is enough to alter global calculations. For Xi Jinping, Traore's salute was a triumph of narrative. It reinforced China's image as the champion of developing nations, a nation that does not lecture or impose, but collaborates and respects. It allowed Beijing to showcase that its influence was not confined to Asia, but extended across oceans, resonating deeply in Africa. For China's domestic audience, it was a moment of validation. The sight of a foreign leader, particularly from Africa, honoring China's parade, symbolized global respect for China's strength and legitimacy. For the Communist Party, it was a reminder that China's rise is inspiring others to chart independent courses, rejecting Western hegemony in favor of a multipolar order. But for Traore, the moment was also deeply strategic. His salute and his words amplified his standing at home, where he is seen as the embodiment of resistance to foreign domination. By aligning with China symbolically, he bolstered his own legitimacy as a leader who is unafraid to challenge the traditional centers of global power. He presented himself as both visionary and pragmatic, willing to engage globally while remaining rooted in the aspirations of his people. His salute was not a surrender to China, but an affirmation of partnership, one that carried immense political capital in an Africa increasingly skeptical of Western motives. The reaction that shook the world, therefore, lies in the intersection of all these narratives. To some, it was a brave act of solidarity, a recognition that the future belongs to those who resist subjugation. To others, it was a warning that Africa is aligning itself with China in ways that could complicate global stability. And to many, it was simply a profound moment of symbolism that captured the shifting tides of history. A young African revolutionary saluting the disciplined march of a rising Asian power, signaling a bond that may shape the century to come. As time passes, the world will analyze, dissect, and interpret the gesture in countless ways. Some will call it an act of defiance against the West. Others will frame it as a pragmatic move for economic and political support. Yet beyond the analysis, the image remains indelible. It is the image of Captain Ibrahim Traore saluting Xi Jinping's parade, a moment where history, power, and aspiration converged, shaking the assumptions of a world long accustomed to its own hierarchies. The salute was brief, but its echoes may shape decades.